Welcome and thanks for joining us for Savita's YEG Housing Month webinar called Strategies for Responding to Community Opposition for Affordable Housing Providers. I hope you had a few minutes to grab some lunch and settle in. My name is Megan Hunka. I work in Savita's Communications Department, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. Before we get started, we want to acknowledge that long before Savita met and worked on this land, diverse Indigenous peoples made their home here and continue to be custodians of the land. We recognize that our work and our presence have an impact on the people with whom we share this territory. Savita recognizes its responsibilities as a result of operating on Treaty 6 territory and affirms a commitment to reconciliation. Today's session is a part of the annual YEG Housing Month campaign, which takes place every November. Savita has partnered with 9 other community agencies for the campaign, and our aim is to raise awareness about the various safe and affordable housing initiatives and strategies being implemented in our city as we work towards our collective goal of ending homelessness. Each organization is presenting a lunch and learn style webinar like this one throughout the month of November, and you can view that full list of events on housingmonth.ca. We encourage you to register for as many as you can. You can also follow along with the campaign and share your own messages on social media using the hashtag YEGHousingMonth. And a little bit of background about Savita. We have a long history of providing affordable housing options for Edmonton families. We began as Edmonton Housing Authority in 1970. In 1995, we became Capital Region Housing. And today we are Savita, the largest provider of social and near market homes in the Edmonton region. We manage over 4,500 community housing units on behalf of the government of Alberta. And we own and manage over 600 near market units and 130 mixed income units. We also lead the way in housing research, policy development, and advocacy. A lot has changed since 1970, but our mission remains the same: to provide safe and affordable housing. The format for today's session will be as follows. You'll hear a 20-minute presentation from Francis, who I'll introduce in a minute. After the presentation, we'll have some time for Q&A. Please feel free to submit any questions you have throughout the session using the Q&A function, and we'll be sure to answer them before we close the webinar. And this session is being recorded. We will post the recording on housingmonth.ca. Now, I am really pleased to introduce our presenter. Frances Campbell is a policy and research analyst at Savita and has been working in the public sector for over 6 years. Her experience in the public and nonprofit sectors has led her to have a particular interest in community development, specifically examining how to redistribute power from those who have too much of it to those who have not enough. Aside from research on community opposition, she's involved in research on tenant engagement and demand maintenance, as well as social housing sustainability. Currently, she's pursuing her Master of Arts from Royal Roads in interdisciplinary studies so that she can use knowledge from all areas of social sciences and humanities to help create more equitable people-oriented systems. And when she's not staring at the screen for work or school, she likes to explore nature by geocaching, going off leash with her dog, or finding the best London fog in the city. It's my pleasure to now turn it over to Frances for her presentation.
All right, thank you, Megan. I am just going to share my screen with you all, and we will get started. Can someone confirm that you see my first title screen?
It is on presenter mode.
Oh, so
see your notes, Frances.
See my notes. Okay, let's try it again. How about now?
Perfect.
Great. Okay. Thanks, folks. So, like Megan said, my name is Frances. My pronouns are he, she, she, her, and I am a policy and research analyst at Savita. I'm excited to share with you some of the findings from Savita's research on our strategies for responding to community opposition. This research was done through a grant from the Alberta Real Estate Housing Foundation in order to better be able to respond to community opposition, develop evidence-based approaches, and contribute to further knowledge in the Alberta context. When we set out to do this research, there were three main questions that drove the project. We see here, what does the existing research show as emerging strategies for responding to community opposition to affordable housing? What does the existing research show about the impacts of affordable housing on neighborhoods with a focus on property values? And what are the impacts of affordable housing developments in Alberta on neighborhoods, again, with a focus on property values? Today, we'll just be looking at the first question. And a brief outline here, so everyone knows what direction we're heading in, is we're going to look at the need for affordable housing. We're going to look at the impact of affordable housing. We're going to look at opposition to affordable housing, and then strategies for responding to community opposition. And I know Megan already mentioned this, but if anyone has any questions, do feel free to put them in the chat, and hopefully I will be able to get to them at the end of the presentation. So, the urgent need for affordable housing. I don't think I need to delve too much into this topic, as I'm sure most of you are involved with the housing and homelessness sector to some degree and understand firsthand how important the need for affordable housing is. But as a refresher, affordable housing in Canada is housing that costs less than 30% of a household's pre-tax gross income. And there's almost 50,000 people in Edmonton that spend more than 30% of their income on housing. Alberta has some of the lowest proportions of households living in subsidized housing in Canada, with only 2.9% living in subsidized housing. And this isn't because there's no need or interest. There's about 19,000 households in Alberta on a wait list for affordable housing. I find this last fact particularly interesting and upsetting, that there's actually no neighborhoods in Edmonton that are affordable to a household working at minimum wage. The same is also true of Calgary. Moving on to the benefits of affordable housing, we know that affordable housing has a multitude of benefits for both the individual and family, as well as a benefit to the community. Affordable housing supports well-being, including mental and physical health, and all the other areas that are associated with individual well-being. At the community level, affordable housing helps to revitalize communities while supporting environmental sustainability. It supports environmental sustainability because it removes developments that were built in the 70s and 80s, replacing inefficient old buildings with either retrogrades or new buildings that have been created to be more efficient, and even in some cases net neutral, like the Right at Home development in North Glenora. The reason I'm telling you about the benefits of affordable housing is because they're important to know when responding to community opposition. As I will discuss later, knowledge will help inform people about what affordable housing in their neighborhood can do. Knowledge really is power, and that power provides a good this knowledge provides a good foundation. Yet, despite the benefits of affordable housing, we know that opposition happens. Opposition not only slows down future developments, but it can also prevent developments entirely. In our research, we looked at what drives this opposition, and we wanted to know why communities are opposed to developments. If we know why the opposition exists, then it can be addressed more effectively. So let's take a look at that. What drives community opposition? Overall, community opposition is not isolated to affordable housing, but affordable housing often contains an intersection of factors that communities are opposed to, which are more likely to increase the likelihood of opposition. These include areas like density, purpose-built rental housing, and concerns about the characteristics of tenants. While community concerns are not inherently problematic, they are often rooted in stigma and stereotypes about low-income households, which often intersects with racialized stereotypes. Community opposition prevents communities from benefiting from this diversity and leads to exclusion of certain groups, thereby limiting their geographical and economic mobility. It also restricts access to high-quality amenity and services for tenants. In fact, research has shown that little negative impacts to the broader community exist after affordable housing developments have been built. Yet, community opposition persists due to the perception of possible risks to the community. Like I've said, these perceptions are often informed by racist and classist stereotypes. So now we're going to take a look at what some of those drivers are to community opposition. First is the perceived impact on neighborhoods. This concern is centered around an individual's sense of place in their neighborhood, including crime and safety, the integration of development with the surrounding neighborhood, and the impact on property values. It also includes concerns about increases in traffic, changing community character, and a perceived threat to open space. In Edmonton, we hear this a lot about vacant school sites. Specifically, this concern looks at property values as being taken as a proxy for one's quality of life. So a decrease in property value is also associated with a decrease in a quality of life. Research indicates that there is no universal negative impact of affordable housing on property value, and property values are more impacted by broader economic and social factors. The research we did also highlights that there's no significant association between crime and affordable housing. These concerns about impacts on the neighborhood are often related to concerns about the impacts of tenants, which we'll discuss more shortly. If you want to know more about our research on property values and crime and affordable housing, you can check out our Savita website. We have some fact sheets up at savita.ca/ahfacts. So the second driver is the perceived impacts of the tenants. This focuses on the stereotypes of the people who live in affordable housing. The stereotypical characteristics of people who are thought to live in affordable housing can impact the community response. That is, the social acceptability of the tenants influences the way people respond to development. Research from the United States indicates that these community concerns, as I've mentioned and will continue to mention, are often ethno-culturally based on stereotypes about race and income, as well as perceived impacts on crime and social disorder. Again, research shows there is no association between increased crime, social disorder, and affordable housing. The icon I put up here illustrates how systemic barriers and ongoing disparities cause certain groups to be overrepresented in their need for affordable housing. That is, for example, because of the legacy of colonialism, Indigenous households are overrepresented as being in need or living in affordable housing. Another driver is the perceived impacts of the built form and the planning process. Concerns that affordable housing will be of poor quality and not maintained. Overall, while there is an issue with deferred maintenance for affordable housing, like I said, most of the affordable housing has been built in the 70s and 80s, there is research that shows affordable housing is often better maintained than comparable private market buildings. Affordable housing is also held to the same or higher design standards as private market buildings. It's also important to again note that this concern about design and community characteristic is linked to concerns about tenant characteristics. There may also be community concerns about the planning process, and generally the residents may be concerned that their voices and their opinions will not be heard. This is actually a broader concern about community engagement and the public planning process, which is out of the scope of our research, but it's still important to recognize. It's also important to consider who usually participates in community engagement and community discussions about planning and zoning, and to think, how can those opportunities be made more equitable? So we know that opposition happens, and these are some common ways that community members will organize their opposition. I think it's interesting and important to note that the most common time for community opposition is after a site has been selected or announced, but before it has been officially approved through the planning process. And I like to think of it as when you're walking by a parking lot or an empty site and you see the sign there. That's kind of around that time. This is particularly likely to occur. Opposition is particularly likely to occur at public hearings. For example, BC has recently seen a number of high-profile public hearings for affordable housing with strong community opposition, including opposition for an affordable housing development that would include tenants with disabilities in Surrey, a joint elementary school and a social housing site in Cole Harbour, and a supportive housing site in Kitsilano. As I will explain briefly, and probably briefly as well, we don't have a lot of time. It is because of when opposition is first expressed that it is important to practice the strategies for dealing with community opposition. So a key here is that it's going to be the theme of engaging early. So now we're going to look at some strategies for responding to this opposition. And I think key here is to remember the most effective way to work through community opposition is through various strategies that are contextually and locally specific. And sometimes you may feel like you're frantically responding like these cats. Let's take a look at some of the broad level strategies in the next few slides. Number 1, educate and inform early. Proactive education and information sharing offers developers the chance to inform before the community can express opposition. The earlier, the better, as it gives people time to not only get comfortable, but evaluate what they may have discomfort about with the new developments. Early education isn't limited to affordable housing. The research reinforces the role of communications and messaging in addressing opposition. Other research also highlights that using different terms like home instead of housing or unit can help positively frame the new development. At the project level, research shows that community members are more likely to support a development project if they feel they have adequate and accurate information about it. The sharing of knowledge builds trust between the community and the developer. This includes both at the beginning of the project, but also regularly and throughout the project. Further, providing data and evidence about the impacts of previous developments can be used to respond to community concerns, such as data on property values or other expressed concerns. Strategy 2, engage early. Engagement is different than education and information, but the strategies do go hand in hand. Community engagement is a term that is often used when developers or governments want to give information to the public. But providers should think of it beyond just information sharing. Engagement is a deliberate and active decision to listen and communicate with community members. The Tamarack Institute, a Canadian organization which develops and supports strategies to engage citizens, defines community engagement as the process by which citizens are engaged to work and learn together on behalf of their communities to create and realize bold visions for the future. Listening is stressed in community engagement guides for municipalities, noting that when the municipal government, along with the housing provider, takes the time to listen to communities, municipalities become a contributor to or a partner in enhancing the well-being of the community. Working with local government can also help establish who is responsible for consistent, accurate, and timely engagement, which helps address community concerns that an engagement process will not consider their opinions. It's also important to be clear and set boundaries about how community feedback and input will be used. Input can range from a level of inform to information sharing and all the way to empower, where communities are active decision makers in the final outcome. An example of this is the Londonderry redevelopment. Excuse me. Savita, at the time, Capital Region Housing, worked with the City of Edmonton before rezoning and before the public hearing process on redeveloping the Londonderry social housing site. Doing this engagement early helped generate community support, and the project went forward, and there was actually no opposition. The number of units went from 80 to 240 mixed income units of market, near market, and deeply subsidized. It's now leasing, and it's expected to be open early next year. You can check out our website for more on there as well. So our third strategy here is to mobilize community leaders. Developers can focus on both minimizing opposition and mobilizing public support in order to benefit the neighborhood during and post-construction. Mobilizing community leaders is a key way to build public support for affordable housing. This can include identifying potential supporters of affordable housing from the project, such as contractors and construction workers, or individuals or groups who will indirectly benefit, such as nearby business owners, employees, and friends and family of potential residents. You can also engage with special interest groups such as churches, charities, and homelessness advocates. Regardless of who you engage with, engaging with community leaders serves to spread information about housing need, breaks down stereotypes, and mobilizes support for affordable housing. Including municipal leaders and councillors is important because they are often the first to hear about community opposition and are well placed to respond to opposition to build support early on. We all know that former Mayor Don Iveson was a strong supporter of housing, And I'm excited that our new mayor and council has lots of advocates for housing as well. I know we at Savita are looking forward to the ways we can work with our new council on bringing affordable housing to more people. The fourth and final strategy is to avoid the term NIMBY. You may have noticed I've been saying community opposition a lot, which is a lot harder to say than NIMBY, but that's because using the term NIMBY creates tension between developers and community members. It also has negative connotations, and it, like I said, increases opposition and creates a false dichotomy, something which can be an impediment when trying to build relationship with community members. The term establishes a divide between rationally civil-minded developers and irrational, angry residents, putting personal interests ahead of societal benefits. Using the term NIMBY fails to examine what exactly opponents of new developments do not want in their backyards. And it does not allow for discussion or nuances about why communities are opposed. This limits how providers and supporters of affordable housing can respond. Instead, a more effective response is to build the understanding of the motives of why community opponents are saying no. Instead of saying NIMBY, if you really want to use an acronym, you can ask yourself, are we doing enough, ENUF, which you can see stands for engage, never use NIMBY, understand, and facilitate. Using this term is a good reminder of what to focus on rather than stereotyping people into certain groups of naysayers. So, in summary, communities can be moved from opposition to support. Affordable housing has many benefits for tenants and the neighborhood, but we know community opposition still persists because of perceived impacts of affordable housing on neighborhoods, because of the perception of the type of people who live there, and the appearance of new buildings themselves. When using strategies to approach opposition, remember, there is no one-size-fits-all formula. I wish I could say that there was, but there isn't. It's about relationship building with the people who are involved. It's about listening, it's about communicating, and really it's about putting in the time with the community members. Consider the history, the practices, and the local context of the community when developing community support, and then adapt the strategies to fit that context. I think the most important thing I would say is get involved with the community early and be genuine. Also important to remember is that it's not all on you. Housing providers should not bear the responsibility of dealing with community opposition alone. That's why it's so important to use your networks to work together. So if you are interested in learning more about affordable housing, about responding to community opposition, you can check out our toolkit on our website. The link is up there, savita.ca/ahfacts. There's a toolkit that's been developed, as well as a whole bunch of different fact sheets with lots of helpful information on a wide array of topics. And I think I'm going to hand it back over to Megan now for some questions and if she has anything else to say.
Thank you, Frances. We do have a question in, they just said we addressed their question. They were asking about a package with some of this information. So again, visiting savita.ca/ahfacts, we have so much information there available that people can download and use for themselves when engaging in the community. If there's any other questions, please feel free to add them to the Q&A, and we'll answer them live. Comments thanking us for the presentation.
Or if anyone has any comments.
Is the chat the only means to ask questions? You can, I think you're more than welcome to reach out after the session to Savita. There's an email address right here, research@savita.ca, where you can contact Frances. Do you find that having people with lived experience telling their stories can have a positive impact during development?
That is a great question. Yes, I do. I think it's really important to include people with lived experience. One example, not from Edmonton, but is from the Yukon when they were establishing their strategy to end homelessness, they had a really big campaign to include people with lived experience on it, and that influenced some of the policies they created. So when I was talking about engagement sessions and creating information sharing, I think that's a key point in the redevelopment process or development process, to include people with lived experiences so they can contribute directly to the development. And also it helps just break down those stereotypes of what people who live in affordable housing are like. And I think something too important to consider is people with lived experience, you need to consider their time and energy that it takes to be involved with things like this. They're not just storytellers, they have lives. So usually some kind of compensation for their time and involvement is something important to consider.
Okay, we have a few more questions. How do you advise addressing opposition to affordable housing developments that are already completed?
Oh, that's tough. I think I would advise to continue to share information about the benefits of affordable housing. I'm guessing and imagining in these scenarios, there's probably like a ringleader or somebody who's a little bit louder than other community members. So I think, really building a relationship with those people and actually listening to what they have to say and continuing to share the benefits of affordable housing. It's a process though, right? Like there's no one size fits all.
Okay, we have another comment. I believe I traveled past the Londonderry development this past weekend. It looks amazing, but in my mind, I was thinking it will not look like that for long. The perception is the lack of accountability in your space.
I'm sorry, I'm just looking for some clarity on that question. Do you mean lack of accountability from the provider or from potential residents?
Cynthia, if you have additional comments, please put them in the chat and then we'll get to your question there. And we'll come back to that one if we get, build it and they will come, but it should be built and take pride within your space.
So I think I mentioned earlier in the presentation that, building standards for affordable housing developers aren't any less than any private market developers. So there is, things will have to be developed to the certain standard that's already exists. And as for residents, I think, it's again, a long-term involvement of education on the benefits. That's kind of a little bit about what my research and tenant engagement and demand maintenance is about. Letting people know the benefits of affordable housing.
Here's another question. With housing first, people are housed first and then deal with whatever challenges they have. Does that create concerns about drug and alcohol users or people with mental health challenges moving into the neighborhood?
I mean, I think that's one of the perceptions that I talked about earlier of some of the stereotypes, but we also know, where's that? The slide that had the circle on it. A lot of times folks who might have mental health and addiction struggles are overrepresented because they don't have access to some of the resources that they need. So I think part of it is part of the perception of fear of increase in crime, which I've already said that research shows there's no increase in crime with affordable housing. And actually tenants of affordable housing are just as likely to be victims of crime in the neighborhood as tenants in private market housing. But I think it's, again, working with the community to understand why people have these fears and how affordable housing will benefit it and will actually help to slowly decrease crime and other stereotypes.
Another question is, does Savita work in smaller communities?
No, so, well, kind of. So Savita, most of our housing is in Edmonton. We do run the rent supplement or help administer the rent supplement program, which has housing in kind of the neighborhood communities of Edmonton, like Sherwood Park, St. Albert, but those are not by buildings owned by us. So yes and no to your question.
Here's another one. Do you have any information on the $440 million that was recently given by the federal government to the city?
I do not know. I could probably access that, but off the top of my head, I'm sorry, I don't know.
Another question. Can you expand on your experience with the Londonderry mixed income housing development? Did you see any different reactions from the public or stakeholders to the idea of market and subsidized rentals compared to purely affordable housing development?
That is a good and a very in-depth question. So interestingly, before I worked for Savita, I actually worked for the then counselor of this ward, and I can say that I've received very few calls or concerns about Londonderry redevelopment. I attended some of the engagement sessions, and a lot of it was about the design of the building. And it was very successful there. I think, Megan, can you repeat part of that question? Sorry.
No problem.
Something about the different types of housing.
Did you see different reactions from stakeholders to the idea of market and subsidized rentals versus a strictly affordable housing development?
Right. Okay. So I wasn't involved in that level of the decision making with the if it would be mixed income or affordable housing or deeply subsidized. But I do know that by having it mixed income, we're able to kind of bring all those different income levels into one unit or into one development. But ultimately, there's a need for more deeply subsidized housing. It's something that I think everybody in the housing sector is aware of. And mixed income is only one small way to address that, which is why it's important to continue to advocate for the benefits of affordable housing. One cool thing about Londonderry redevelopment is that we implemented a partnership with Nate and Stuart Olson. Yeah, Stuart Olson, who was the builder. We actually employed some of our tenants in some of the trades aspects of the building, and so any income that the tenants made while helping build Londonderry was not counted as income. So they were able to stay in our housing, get construction and trades experience in their area of expertise, and help build this new development, which I think is also a very exciting aspect of Londonderry, and I think something that we're kind of hoping to explore in the future.
All right, another question is, how can one get on a committee to share their experience?
That is a good question. I don't think I have a straightforward answer, unfortunately, other than, I would reach out to different organizations like Savita, organizations that address affordable housing. I'm sure if you did some Googling, you could find lots of organizations, even looking at the YEG Housing, looking at who's involved with YEG Housing. And then, I would, just call them up. But that's a great question. Unfortunately, I'm not in a super position to answer it other than saying Google.
Here's another question, Francis. I work in a housing agency, and in the past, I was able to get some participants into near market housing as long as they met the Savita requirements, and this was in 2020. Oftentimes, these people who were mobility and technologically challenged or just lacked the self-confidence, it felt quite easy to advocate for them in that way. Now with the online form approach that applies to all, is there any way or quota that Savita is setting aside for referrals from agencies?
Not to my knowledge. So the requirements are actually set out by the government of Alberta. So they're not anything that we create. They're regulated by the government of Alberta through the social housing. The income limits are regulated and some other requirements, but I would say there's no, actually that would probably be a question that would be best directed to our Director of Customer Service. So if you just email it to help@savita.ca, they can be able to answer that. But also great work. I'm glad that you're finding it not too difficult to advocate for your clients. So thank you for that.
Another question here. How has the experience of Habitat for Humanity helped understand how to engage community?
I actually don't have much involvement with Habitat for Humanity, so I don't feel in a position to answer that question.
Okay, we have another one here. On a personal note, within my church, I have met a lot of seniors who are seeking affordable housing, and most of them don't make a lot in terms of income. They also don't want to go through the housing agencies. So for those folks, how do I bridge the gap for them to be able to become residents with Savita? Once again, many of them are technologically challenged with no access to emails and sometimes cell phones.
So we do still accept paper applications. It's just a matter of emailing help@savita.ca or giving us a phone call at the numbers there, 420-6161. And there's non-techie ways of being able to access our housing.
Will there be any developments in the South Side or Millwoods area?
I believe there are some. There are plans. I am not at the table that makes the decisions on all of that, but I know that Savita is, always hoping and pushing for more affordable housing throughout the entire city.
And you can visit our website, savita.ca, and we have a new construction tab that will have up-to-date information about new builds. Lots of questions. This might be a comment. I think if these places were built with access to helping professionals close by, that would be most beneficial. Dealing with the health and mental state of lower income. In most cases, the single parent has lack of support and minimum wage and income. Having a community garden or the requirement to volunteer in your surroundings for subsidy. Park cleanup, snow shoveling, etc. I guess that's just a comment.
But I think that points to importance of being engaged in your community. So yeah, good comment.
At what point of the process does community engagement begin for future projects? How is this information given to the area residents?
I would say it depends on the organization. With Londonderry, like I said, it began before the rezoning, and I think it was there was physical information sessions like in the evenings, and I think they did some in the afternoons as well, and mail outs for the surrounding area.
How is near market rent calculated in Edmonton?
Sorry, can you say that again?
How is near market rate? How is the near market rate calculated in Edmonton?
Yeah, I would encourage you to check out our website for that. We have a whole bunch of information on the different regulations that we have to follow.
And Stacy is adding here, near market is 10 to 20% below CMHC neighborhood rates. Stacy is our director of customer service. She's on the call. Thank you, Stacy. There's a comment here. I was told that the Lendrum housing was for families, as housing is extremely limited in the Southwest. Single males have little to no ability to access subsidized housing. These are folks whose income is about $20,000 per year. This has been extremely challenging. They cannot afford the lower than market value rentals.
Yes, that is an important issue. Again, I would say check out our website. There's in the new developments page Megan was mentioning, there's stuff about Lendrum.
Right, so we only have about 5 minutes left, so I think we will close the session. If you have additional questions, please reach out to help@savita.ca, or if you have questions specifically related to the research, you can reach Francis at this research@savita.ca email address. We want to thank you very much for attending. We hope you enjoyed the session, and we hope you're now equipped with some strategies when faced with community opposition. Again, this recording will be posted to housingmonth.ca, and you can access the full toolkit created from this research on our website at savita.ca/ahfacts. We invite you to register for some of the other Housing Month sessions taking place in the coming weeks. Next week, Homeward Trust is presenting on November 16th and Bissell Center on November 18th, and there are plenty more to come after that. Finally, I encourage you to visit savita.ca and follow us on social media to learn more about our work. So thank you very much, and take care. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.